Brenda Whitmore's shrill voice cuts through the morning air. "Get away from there! That's private property!" She's screaming at a black man in army fatigues who's sitting on his own dock fishing. Her teenage son, Kyle, cringes behind her. "Ma'am, this is my cabin," Darius Mitchell says calmly, not even turning around. The smell of diesel from her speedboat mixes with his coffee. "Bullshit. I'm calling 911 right now." 20 minutes later, gravel explodes under police tires. Officer Johnson storms toward. Darius, hand on his weapon. "Sir!" Step away from he freezes. His eyes lock on the tackle box beside Darius' brass nameplate reading Major General D. Mitchell, U.S. Army. Johnson's face goes white. He snaps to attention, renders a crisp salute. "Yes, Major General." "Ma'am," he turns to Brenda. "You just called the cops on a decorated war hero at his own property." Brenda's mouth falls open like a dying fish. "What would you do if someone called the cops on you at your own property?" Drop a flag emoji for where you're watching from. 2 months earlier, Darius Mitchell had driven up this same gravel road with everything he owned packed in a U-Haul. Years of military service, 4 combat deployments, and a Bronze Star, all leading to this moment of peace. His grandfather's fishing cabin waited like an old friend, weathered cedar shingles gray as morning mist. The cabin sat on 2 acres of prime lakefront, the largest grandfathered lot on Clearwater Lake. Grandpa Joe had bought it in 1944 with his GI Bill money back when the lake was just a local fishing spot. Now it was surrounded by riverside estates, 40 upscale cabins where lawyers and doctors played weekend warrior. Darius had inherited more than property. Sarah's death 2 years ago from cancer had left him hollow, going through military motions until retirement finally freed him. No kids, no family left except memories soaked into these pine walls. The musty smell of old wood mixed with his grandfather's pipe tobacco still lingered in the corners. That first week was perfect. He'd replaced rotted dock planks. The rhythmic hammering echoing across still water painted the cabinet's original forest green, same color Grandpa Joe had chosen. The physical work felt good, real, honest, healing. Then came the knock. Brenda Whitmore stood on his porch like a real estate brochure come to life. Perfect, blonde bob, designer lake clothes, smile sharp as a fishing hook. Behind her lurked Kyle, 16 and uncomfortable, clearly dragged along against his will. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Her voice could shatter crystal. "I'm Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. Just wanted to discuss some concerns." She handed him an official-looking notice. Unauthorized structural modifications. Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. Darius scanned the document. Tasting bitter coffee from his morning cup, $500 daily fine for dock repairs and exterior painting without prior approval. He looked up. "Ma'am, this is a grandfathered property, been in my family since 1944. "Oh, honey." Brenda's smile never wavered. "That old grandfathering thing doesn't really apply anymore. We've modernized the community standards, can't have people just doing whatever they want." The way she said people made Kyle Ws, the kid had decent instincts. "The fine starts immediately," she continued. "Of course, if you found this community wasn't quite the right fit, I do have clients looking for lakefront properties, prime development potential." Darius felt that familiar calm descend the same feeling before walking into hostile territory, voice steady. "I'll be keeping the cabin, ma'am. We'll see about that." Her mask slipped for just a second, revealing something cold underneath. Then the realtor's smile snapped back. "Come along, Kyle." As they walked away, Kyle glanced back apologetically. Good kid, wrong mother. That evening, Darius sat on his dock watching sunset paint the water gold. Loons called across the lake, the same sound his grandfather had loved. Sarah's voice whispered in his memory. "Some battles choose you, Darius. Question is whether you're still willing to fight them." He pulled out his phone and photographed the violation notice. Old habit from 30 years of dealing with military bureaucracy. Document everything. The paper felt flimsy between his fingers, but he recognized the weight behind it. This wasn't about dock planks or paint colors. This was about power, territory, and who belonged where. His neighbor, Martha Kowalski, waved from her deck next door. Sweet Polish grandmother, probably 80 years. Old, living in her family's original cabin since the 1960s. She'd brought him a casserole that first day, shared stories about his grandfather's legendary fish fries. "Everything all right, dear?" she called. "Just getting acquainted with the neighbors, Martha." The old woman's expression darkened. "That Whitmore woman been bothering you? She's been a plague on this community since she moved in. Pushed out the Hendersons last year with her HOA. Nonsense. Interesting." Darius filed that information away. In the Army, you learn to spot patterns, individual incidents versus systematic campaigns. This was starting to smell like the latter. As darkness fell over Clearwater Lake, Darius made himself a simple dinner and planned his next move. Some people mistake patience for weakness. They were about to learn the difference. The next morning brought another surprise visitor, a county inspector with a clipboard and a bewildered expression. Jim Rodriguez had been doing this job for 15 years, and he'd never been called out for something this ridiculous. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm here about unpermitted dock modifications." He gestured at the perfectly reasonable plank replacements. "Honestly, sir, I'm scratching my head here. This is basic maintenance, maybe $50 in lumber." Across the road, Brenda sat in her white Mercedes like a discount spy. Telephoto camera trained on the crime scene. The morning sun caught her windshield, creating little rainbow flashes that would have been pretty if they weren't so pathetic. "Who filed the complaint?" Darius asked, savoring his coffee's bitter warmth. "HOA president. She's called 6 times this week about your property alone." Rodriguez lowered his voice. "Dock repairs, exterior painting, even your American flag being oversized. Between you and me, I served 2 tours with the Guard. Is that a Bronze Star plate? Afghanistan, 2009. The inspector's whole demeanor shifted. "My nephew was 82nd Airborne. Thank you for your service." He glanced meaningfully toward Brenda's surveillance operation. Ma'am might want to do her homework before picking fights with decorated veterans, but Brenda was doubling down harder than a gambling addict. That afternoon, her Facebook post appeared in Riverside Estates Neighbors. Safety alert. Newcomer shows aggressive behavior toward community leadership. Refuses to follow established guidelines. Concerned for our children's well-being. The post had 3 angry face reactions and 1 comment from someone's grandmother asking what aggressive behavior meant. Kyle had apparently liked it by accident, then quickly unliked it, the digital equivalent of a Freudian slip by evening. She'd escalated to filing a noise complaint. The sheriff's deputy who responded looked around the peaceful lakefront setting like he'd been called to investigate a unicorn sighting. Someone reported construction noise during business hours. "You doing any hammering, sir?" Replaced 3 loose deck boards around noon. The deputy's radio squawked with actual emergencies, domestic disturbance, possible break-in, real police work. "Well, that's perfectly legal. Sorry for bothering you." After the deputy left, Darius sat on his deck planning his counterattack. In the Army, he'd learned that bureaucratic warfare followed predictable patterns. His old sergeant used to say, "When they come at you with paperwork, you'd better have better paperwork." That's when he remembered something from his divorce attorney years ago, HOA transparency laws. Any homeowner could demand complete financial records within 10 business days. Most corrupt boards folded immediately when faced with actual scrutiny, because daylight was the best disinfectant for shady dealings. He drafted the request that night, every word carefully chosen. Years of military documentation had taught him the power of precise language. While waiting for Brenda's inevitable stonewalling, Darius installed security cameras around his property. The gentle whir of motors adjusting. Focus reminded him of base security systems, familiar, reassuring sounds of protection. Martha arrived with apple pie the next evening, cinnamon and butter scents mixing with pine needle air. "Your grandfather would be grinning," she said, settling into his porch rocker. Joe never backed down from neighborhood bullies either. "Tell me about these other families," she pushed out. Martha's knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. Brenda cited them for mailbox height, grass length, car improperly parked in their own driveway, buried them in fines until they sold for half market value. The pattern was becoming clear. Anyone else? Elderly Kowalskis on Pine Street. No relation to me. She claimed their bird feeders attracted rodents and vermin, $200 daily fines until they couldn't afford groceries, let alone legal fees. Darius recognized the tactical approach. Systematically, target vulnerable residents, overwhelm them with bureaucratic harassment, force financial capitulation, classic asymmetric warfare, civilian edition. But Brenda had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd engaged someone who actually understood how to fight dirty. The next morning, Kyle jogged past during Darius's coffee ritual. The teenager's pace slowed. Internal conflict written across his young face. "Morning, Kyle." "Hey, Mr. Mitchell." The kid looked like he was carrying the weight of family secrets. "I'm sorry about my mom. She gets really intense when she thinks someone's challenging her authority. Not your responsibility." Son Kyle glanced around, making sure they were alone. "Since Dad left, she's been different. Angry, constantly talking about this huge development deal that could set us up for life. Something about clearing obstacles from prime lakefront properties. There, it was. The real motive. Real. This wasn't personal harassment. This was business. Brenda was systematically clearing properties for development clients, earning fat commissions while destroying lives. That afternoon brought Brenda's predictable response to his financial records request, denied frivolous harassment of volunteer HOA leadership. Wrong answer. Darius immediately filed a state oversight complaint, his fingers remembering the rhythm of military efficiency. His grandfather had taught him patience while fishing. Sometimes you wait all day for exactly the right moment to set the hook. The cameras captured everything now. Every violation notice, every surveillance drive-by, every late-night reconnaissance mission Brenda thought was secret. Let the games begin. Days later, Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and desperation as residents trickled in, most looking confused about what constituted an emergency on a Tuesday evening. Brenda had dressed for battle power suit, freshly blown hair, the kind of smile that could sell swamp land to tourists. She'd positioned herself behind the podium like a general addressing troops. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have serious security concerns to address." Her voice carried that particular pitch that made dogs whimper. "Recent violations of community standards threaten our property values and family safety." She clicked through a PowerPoint presentation that would have made corporate middle management weep with pride. "I'm proposing emergency rule amendments requiring pre-approval for all property modifications regardless of so-called grandfathered status." The room shifted uncomfortably. Most residents had grandfathered properties. It's what made Riverside Estates special. Furthermore, Brenda continued, "I'm recommending a $5,000 retroactive fine for existing unauthorized improvements." Her eyes found Darius in the back row. Some people think old deeds exempt them from community standards. That's when Martha stood up. All 80 lb of Polish grandmother fury. "Brenda, honey, my family's been here since 1962. You want to fine me for my garden shed that's older than you are?" Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Martha had a point. Half the properties had unauthorized improvements dating back decades. But Darius had done his homework. During his lunch break, he'd visited the county recorder's office, diving into public records like an investigative journalist with a military security clearance. What he found was fascinating. Brenda's divorce settlement required her to maintain mortgage payments alone, $40,200 monthly on a house she couldn't really afford. Her real estate income had dropped 30% as the market cooled. She needed big commissions fast. Even more interesting was her mysterious client, Lakeshore Development LLC, incorporated just 6 months ago with a Delaware shell company structure that screamed, "Hide the money trail." "I'd like to request a postponement," Darius said calmly, standing in the back. The room turned toward his voice. Proper notice wasn't given for rule changes, this substantial. State law requires 14 days written notice to all homeowners. Brenda's composure cracked like thin ice. "This is an emergency meeting addressing immediate safety concerns." "What emergency exactly?" Darius pulled out his phone. "Mind if I record this?" "State's a one-party consent jurisdiction. Learned that during my divorce." He'd actually learned it from a paralegal friend, but the bluff worked beautifully. Several residents shifted in their seats. Tom Bradley, a grizzled Vietnam vet with arms, like tree trunks, nodded approvingly. "Good idea, son. Keep them honest." The vote was supposed to be a formality. Brenda typically steamrolled these meetings with prepared proxies and intimidated silence. Instead, 3 board members abstained after seeing Darius's grandfather's deed, and 2 others started asking uncomfortable questions about proper procedures. "Motion postponed pending proper notice," announced the board secretary, a timid accountant who'd apparently grown a spine. Brenda's mask slipped completely. "Fine, but don't think this is over." She gathered her materials with sharp, angry movements. "Some of you might want to consider whether this community is still the right fit for your lifestyle." As residents filed out, Kyle lingered near the back. He approached Darius hesitantly, like a kid approaching a growling dog. "Mr. Mitchell, can I ask you something?" "Sure, son. My mom keeps talking about college fund money being invested in some big business deal. She says once these lakefront properties get developed, we'll never have to worry about money again." Kyle's voice dropped to a whisper. "Is she doing something illegal?" The kid was sharper than his mother gave him credit for. "Kyle, I can't give you legal advice, but I will say this. When adults start talking about never having to worry about money again, that's usually when you should start worrying." Kyle nodded, solemnly processing this like the life lesson it was. That night, Martha knocked on Darius's door with a plate of pierogi and valuable intelligence. The sour cream and onion smells made his mouth water real comfort food. "Thought you should know," she said, settling into his kitchen chair. Brenda's been visiting other lakefront owners. The Kowalskis weren't the only ones. She systematically targeted military families, elderly folks, anyone she thinks won't fight back. How many? At least 6 families in the past 2 years, all sold below market value, all to the same development company. Martha's eyes glittered with righteous anger. "Your grandfather used to say the lake had a way of washing out the trash. Maybe it's time for some high tide." Darius filed this information carefully. In military intelligence, you learn to spot patterns versus coincidences. This was definitely the former. He was dealing with a systematic campaign, not random harassment. That changed everything, including his response strategy. Time to go on the offensive. Brenda's next move came at dawn, delivered by a nervous-looking private investigator who clearly wished he was anywhere else. The man knocked on Darius's door, clutching a manila folder like it contained nuclear secrets. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Pete Garrison, private investigator. I've been hired to conduct a background check on you for civil litigation purposes." He shifted uncomfortably. "Standard procedure, nothing personal." Darius recognized the type ex-cop, probably decent guy making a living in the gray areas. "Who's paying your bill, Pete?" "Client confidentiality, you understand?" But Pete's eyes kept darting toward Brenda's house across the lake, subtle as a neon sign. "Well, you'll find everything you need in my military service record. Years honorable discharge, Bronze star, purple heart. Darius sipped his morning coffee, letting that sink in. Though I'm curious why someone would waste money investigating a decorated veteran. Pete's face went through several interesting color changes. Purple Heart IED outside Kandahar, spent 3 months at Walter Reed. Darius watched, the investigator's professional demeanor crumble in real time. You military Pete Marines, 95-9. Pete's voice carried that particular reverence Marines held for combat veterans. Sir, with respect, I think I'm going to return my retainer and recommend my client find a new hobby. That afternoon, Pete apparently made good on his promise. Darius watched through his kitchen window as Pete's car pulled into Brenda's driveway, stayed. Exactly 4 minutes, then left with squealing tires, even from across the lake. He could hear Brenda's voice rising to frequencies that probably bothered the local wildlife. But Brenda was just getting warmed up. By evening, she'd filed a police report claiming Darius had verbally threatened her during a chance encounter at the community mailboxes. The responding officer was the same young deputy from the noise complaint, Officer Johnson, according to his nameplate. Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask about an alleged verbal altercation earlier today. What altercation? I haven't left my property today except to check my mail around 3. Johnson consulted his notepad. Mrs. Whitmore claims you approached her aggressively and made threatening statements about making her pay for harassment. Darius almost laughed. Officer? I said good afternoon and asked if her mail was forwarded correctly. The only threat in that conversation was her promise to make my life hell until I leave. Something in Johnson's expression shifted. Sir, are you the Major General Mitchell, who spoke at the Veterans Day ceremony 2 years ago at the high school? Guilty as charged. Johnson's whole posture changed. My little brother was in the audience that day. Your speech about service and sacrifice, he enlisted the next month because of what you said. The officer glanced toward his patrol car, then back. Sir, between us, Mrs. Whitmore's name shows up in our system a lot. Noise complaints, harassment reports, suspicious activity calls, usually targeting people she's having disputes with. That was interesting information. In Afghanistan, Darius had learned that local intelligence was often more valuable than satellite imagery. Officer Johnson was providing crucial tactical data about Brenda's patterns. Any advice, officer? Document everything and maybe invest in a good security system. Johnson's radio crackled with actual police work. Have a good evening, sir, and thank you for your service. After Johnson left, Darius pulled up his state's Freedom of Information Act website. He'd learned about FOIA requests during his Pentagon assignment sunshine laws that forced government transparency. Within 10 minutes, he'd submitted requests for all police reports filed by Brenda Whitmore in the past 2 years. The system was beautiful in its simplicity. Government agencies had to provide public records unless they contained classified information. Most citizens never bothered with FOIA requests, but they were democracy's secret weapon against abuse of power. Days later, the responses arrived. Separate police reports filed by Brenda in 18 months, noise complaints, suspicious activity, verbal threats, trespassing. The pattern was unmistakable. She weaponized law enforcement against anyone who opposed her, but Darius noticed something else in the reports. Inconsistencies, impossible timelines, claims that couldn't be verified. False police reports were a misdemeanor in most states, and serial false reporting could become a felony. This wasn't just harassment, this was criminal behavior. That evening, Kyle appeared at his dock during his usual jogging route. The kid looked like he was carrying the weight of family secrets. Mr. Mitchell, I need to tell you something. Kyle's voice shook with teenage moral crisis. My mom's been recording conversations with neighbors. She has files on everyone she considers problems, including me, especially you. She's trying to build a case that you're some kind of threat to the community. Kyle's voice dropped to a whisper. She's also been using my college fund money for legal fees and that development deal I'm supposed to start. looking at schools next year, but the kid was losing his future to his mother's obsession. That crossed every line Darius held sacred. Kyle, that information stays between us for now, but you did the right thing telling me. Time to take the gloves off completely. Days later, Kyle showed up at Darius's cabin at dawn, clutching his phone like evidence in a murder trial. The kid's hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the moral weight of what he was about to do. Mr. Mitchell, I can't sleep anymore. I keep thinking about those families my mom forced out, and now she's doing the same thing to you. Kyle's voice cracked with teenage anguish. I recorded something last night. He played a phone conversation between Brenda and someone called Mr. Joseph, presumably her mysterious development client. Brenda's voice. The military guy is being stubborn, but I can handle him. Same playbook as before. Harassment complaints, violation fines make life unbearable until he sells. Chen's response. Timelines. Critical, Mrs. Whitmore. We need those 3 lakefront properties cleared by spring to break ground. Your commission depends on results. Don't worry. I forced out 6 families already using HOA pressure. 1 decorated veteran won't be a problem. The recording continued with chilling detail. How they'd used shell companies to hide Joseph's identity. How Brenda had manipulated HOA rules to target specific ethnic and economic demographics. How she'd split commissions with a corrupt county assessor to inflate property taxes on undesirable residents. Kyle's face was pale as moonlight. There's more. She keeps spreadsheets on her laptop, names, addresses, income estimates, what she calls vulnerability factors, military families, elderly people, minorities, single parents, anyone she thinks won't fight back. This wasn't random harassment. This was systematic ethnic cleansing disguised as community improvement. Darius felt his military training kick in. That cold, analytical calm that came with recognizing enemy action. Patterns. Kyle, this is conspiracy to commit housing discrimination, federal civil rights violation. I know. I looked it up after I heard the recording. Kyle's voice carried adult weight now. My college fund, the money she invested in Mr. Joseph's company, it's gone, isn't it? Darius couldn't lie to the kid. Probably, son. These development schemes usually collapse when someone starts asking hard questions. They sat in heavy silence, watching sunrise paint the lake gold. Kyle had just discovered his mother wasn't just difficult, she was criminal. That's a hell of a thing for a 16-year-old to process. What do I do now? What your conscience tells you is right. Kyle nodded slowly, decision crystallizing in his young face. I want to help you stop her. Not just for you, but for all the families she destroyed. That afternoon, Martha arrived with devastating intelligence and homemade cookies. The sugar and butter smell couldn't quite mask the bitter news she carried. Talked to Eleanor Henderson yesterday? Martha said, settling into the porch rocker. She and Jim were that young couple with the baby. They're living in a trailer park now, both working. 2 jobs to pay off legal fees from fighting Brenda's harassment. The human cost was staggering. How many others? The Kowalskis are in assisted living, sold their house for half its value, can barely afford their medication. The Rodriguez family moved to an apartment complex in town. Kids had to change schools. Martha's voice carried old pain. 6 families destroyed. So far, all to clear prime lakefront for some rich developers' vacation homes. Darius felt something shift inside him. The same feeling from Afghanistan when you realized civilian casualties weren't accidental collateral damage, but deliberate targeting. This was War Crimes Suburban Edition. Martha, I need you to contact those families. Tell them there might be a way to get justice. You think so? Federal housing discrimination law doesn't have a statute of limitations for ongoing conspiracies. If we can prove systematic targeting based on race, age, military status, Brenda and her developer friend are looking at serious prison time. That evening, Kyle returned with his mother's laptop password and a USB drive full of evidence. The kid had chosen his side in this war. As Darius scrolled through Brenda's files, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about Riverside Estates. Chen's company had similar operations in 3 other lakefront communities, all using the same HOA harassment tactics. They were running a criminal enterprise worth millions of dollars in forced property sales. And tomorrow, Darius was going to start tearing it down. The hunters had just become the hunted. The next morning, Darius's cabin transformed into a military command center. Maps of the lake covered his dining table, legal documents stacked like ammunition, and his grandfather's old rotary phone started ringing with calls from unexpected allies. Tom Bradley arrived first, his Vietnam veteran baseball cap slightly askew and carrying a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Heard through the grapevine. "You're taking on the neighborhood tyrant. Count me in, son." Behind Tom came a parade of supporters Darius hadn't expected. Eleanor Henderson drove up from her trailer park with a box of documents. Every harassment letter, every bogus fine, every threatening phone call Brenda had made during their ordeal, the bitter smell of burnt coffee from her travel mug mixed with determination in her voice. "We kept everything," Eleanor said, spreading papers across Darius's coffee table. "Jim said I was crazy for saving all those violation notices, but something told me we'd need proof someday." Boo Martha arrived with Polish determination and a contact list that read like a small-town phone book, called My Church Prayer Circle, the Senior Center Book Club, and my nephew, who's a paralegal in the city. Word spreading, dear. By noon, Darius had assembled what his old sergeant would have called a coalition of the willing. Kyle sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, downloading his mother's files onto encrypted drives with the focused intensity of a teenager on a mission. The kid had inherited his father's IT skills, thankfully. "Mr. Mitchell," Kyle said without looking up, "I found her client communications going back 2 years. She's been targeting families based on what she calls demographic vulnerability assessments, single mothers, elderly residents, military families with PTSD, immigrants, anyone she thought couldn't fight back effectively." The systematic nature was breathtaking. Darius had seen ethnic cleansing operations in Afghanistan that were less organized than Brenda's suburban campaign. His phone rang, a number he recognized from his Pentagon days. Colonel Sarah Martinez from Military Legal Assistance returning his call. "Darius, good to hear your voice. Heard you're dealing with some housing discrimination issues, more like a full-scale civil rights violation. Sarah, I'm sending you files that'll make your hair curl. Already got preliminary review from your local American Legion post. This looks federal systematic targeting of protected classes, conspiracy to defraud, possible RICO violations if multiple communities are involved." Her voice carried that particular satisfaction lawyers got when facing down clear-cut villains. "I'm connecting you with DOJ Civil Rights Division. They love cases like this." While Sarah worked her federal contacts, Darius coordinated local intelligence gathering. Martha's church network had identified 8 more families across 3 communities who'd been forced out using identical tactics. The pattern was undeniable. Chen's organization was running a multi-state operation. Tom Bradley proved invaluable for veteran outreach. Got buddies in the American Legion, VFW, even some guys from the local Marine Corps League. Military families stick together, especially against bullies wearing civilian clothes. The knowledge came flooding back from his divorce proceedings years earlier. Community organizing was like military logistics, just with more casserlies and fewer guns. You needed clear objectives, reliable communications, and people willing to do unglamorous work for the greater good. Eleanor Henderson became their civilian casualties coordinator, tracking down displaced families and documenting financial damages. Her trailer park had better internet than most offices, and she'd learned spreadsheet skills from her accounting job. Current damage estimate is approaching $2.3 million enforced. Below market sales, she reported, reading from her laptop screen. That's just the families we've contacted so far. Kyle discovered the financial smoking gun around dinner time. Chen's company had been artificially inflating property tax assessments through a corrupt county official, creating financial pressure that made HOA harassment even more effective. "Look at this," Kyle said, pointing to his screen. "Mom has email chains with someone named Deputy Assessor Williams. They coordinate timing. Williams raises property taxes right before Mom starts her harassment campaigns. Families can't afford both the tax increase and the HOA fines, so they sell quickly. That was conspiracy to commit fraud, a federal felony carrying serious prison time." Darius felt the familiar satisfaction of watching enemy plans unravel under scrutiny. His old battalion commander used to say, "Amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics." Brenda's operation depended on victims staying isolated and overwhelmed. But once you organized the community, shared information, and brought in federal resources, her whole system collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. By evening, they had a coordinated battle plan. Simultaneous federal civil rights complaints, state real estate commission ethics violations, criminal referrals for fraud and conspiracy, and a community-wide HOA board removal petition. "Timeline?" Tom asked, reviewing the strategy notes. "Federal complaint filing Monday morning. Real estate commission hearing Wednesday. Community board removal vote Friday evening." Darius felt that old military confidence returning. By next weekend, Brenda's operation gets shut down permanently. Martha raised her coffee mug in a toast to justice served with a side of puriogi. Everyone laughed, the kind of nervous laughter that comes before decisive battles. Monday morning brought Brenda's most desperate move yet. A motion filed in family court to remove Kyle from their home, claiming he was in imminent danger due to his association with unstable military personnel exhibiting concerning behavior patterns. Kyle found the papers taped to his bedroom door like some twisted eviction notice. His hand shook as he read his mother's sworn statement describing Darius as a potentially violent veteran with documented PTSD who had weaponized my son against me through psychological manipulation. "She's completely lost it," Kyle whispered into his phone during their emergency. "Morning call. The court date is Thursday. She thinks if she gets me removed from the house, I can't testify against her." But Brenda had made a critical error. Family courts took false endangerment claims seriously, especially when they involve slandering decorated veterans. Her desperation was showing, and desperate people make sloppy mistakes. That afternoon, County Inspector Rodriguez called with disturbing news. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to report an attempted bribery. Mrs. Whitmore offered me $2,000 to cite your property for septic violations, building code issues, whatever I could make stick." The conversation had been recorded. Rodriguez wore a wire after their first suspicious interaction weeks ago. Smart man who'd recognized Brenda's pattern early. She specifically mentioned needing violations serious enough to force immediate evacuation, Rodriguez continued. Said something about timeline pressure from her development client. "I've forwarded everything to the district attorney's office. Bribery was a felony. Conspiracy to commit fraud was a felony. And filing false court documents was perjury, also a felony." Brenda was racking up serious prison time with each desperate move. By evening, she'd escalated to direct sabotage. Darius's security cameras captured her at 2 a.m., dressed in black like some suburban ninja cutting his dock lines during a thunderstorm. The infrared footage was crystal clear, her face illuminated by lightning, bolt cutters in hand, working methodically to set his floating dock adrift. The storm damage would have been extensive if Martha hadn't called at. "Dawn, dear, your dock is floating toward the spillway. Thought you'd want to know. It took 4 neighbors and a borrowed boat to retrieve the dock before it went over the dam." The sabotage was obvious. Clean cuts through marine rope that would have cost thousands. In storm damage, if not caught early, But Kyle provided the most damaging evidence that afternoon. His mother's attorney had quit. She fired him, actually, Kyle said, sitting heavily in Darius's kitchen chair. I overheard the phone call, he said. Her case was legally and ethically indefensible, and he wouldn't be part of filing fraudulent court documents. Losing your lawyer before a federal investigation was like your parachute failing during a combat jump. Bad news that was about to get much worse. That evening brought Brenda's nuclear option. She'd hired a new attorney, the kind advertised on late night television with promises to fight dirty when the system fails you. This lawyer had a reputation for scorched earth tactics and flexible ethics. The new strategy involved flooding every possible agency with complaints. EPA violations for dock modifications, fish and wildlife violations for disturbing nesting loons, county health department violations for improperly maintained septic systems, and fire marshal violations for unsafe propane storage. Each complaint triggered automatic inspections, creating bureaucratic harassment that could tie up Darius's property for months. It was guerrilla warfare using government agencies as weapons. She's trying to overwhelm you with administrative chaos, explained Colonel Martinez during their evening phone call, classic delay tactic. If she can bog you down in regulatory disputes, she delays the federal investigation and maybe forces you to settle quietly. But Brenda had forgotten about Kyle's access to her communications. The kid had been documenting everything. Every bribed complaint, every false allegation, every fraudulent claim. His evidence files read like a manual for criminal conspiracy. She hired some guy named Detective Walsh, private investigator, with connections in county government, Kyle reported. They're coordinating complaint timing to maximize harassment. Walsh feeds her information about which agencies respond fastest and ask fewer questions. The corruption network was expanding, but so was the federal case against it. Each new conspirator meant additional charges and longer prison sentences. Wednesday brought the breaking point. Brenda's development client, Mr. Joseph, pulled out completely. Kyle intercepted the phone call, where Joseph's lawyer informed Brenda that federal investigators had contacted their company about housing discrimination allegations. The project is terminated immediately, Joseph had said. Our legal department considers you a liability we cannot afford to maintain. That evening, Brenda's house went dark early. Through his binoculars, Darius watched her pacing frantically. In her living room, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling every contact she had left. Her criminal empire was crumbling. Her financial backing had evaporated, and her own son had turned state's evidence against her. Tomorrow's family court hearing would be the least of her problems. Martha knocked on his door with fresh coffee and battlefield intelligence. Saw 3 cars leave Brenda's driveway today. Looked like attorneys or investigators. Word around town is she's trying to declare bankruptcy to avoid the federal charges. Too late for that. Federal civil rights violations couldn't be discharged in bankruptcy, and criminal charges certainly couldn't be wished away with paperwork. The siege was nearly over. Thursday morning brought Brenda's final desperate gambit, a frantic 911 call at 6:47 a.m., her voice shrill with manufactured panic. I need police, immediately. The dangerous veteran is threatening my son. He's outside our house right now, banging on the door, shouting about making me pay. The recorded call would later become evidence of perjury, but Brenda was beyond caring about legal consequences. Officer Johnson responded, finding Darius peacefully drinking coffee on his own deck 200 YD across the lake. The morning mist rising from the water made it impossible for anyone to miss the obvious. Darius hadn't left his property, and sound didn't carry that direction across open water. Sir, we have another complaint from Mrs. Whitmore. She claims you're at her house making threats. Darius gestured toward his security camera system, its red recording lights blinking steadily. Officer, I've got 8 cameras with timestamps showing. I haven't left this deck since 5 a.m. Coffee's still warm if you want proof I'm not some kind of teleporting ninja. Johnson couldn't suppress a grin. Sir, this is the 7th false report she's filed about you in 2 weeks. I'm recommending charges for filing fraudulent police reports. But Brenda's desperation had reached psychotic levels. That afternoon, Kyle discovered her ultimate sabotage plan. She'd hired 2 men to plant stolen merchandise on Darius's property, then call in an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. Mom's completely lost it, Kyle whispered during their emergency phone call. She hired these sketchy guys from downtown, gave them a laptop and some jewelry she claimed were stolen. They're supposed to hide them in your shed tonight. Then she calls, "Police in the morning." The frame-up was amateur hour. Any competent investigation would reveal the planted evidence immediately. But desperate people don't think clearly. And Brenda was drowning in her own lies. Darius coordinated with Officer Johnson to catch the plant in progress. At 11:30 p.m., his infrared cameras captured 2 men breaking into his tool shed, hiding a laptop and jewelry box behind paint cans. The footage was perfect clearances, obvious criminal activity, directly connected to Brenda's conspiracy. Johnson arrested both men within the hour. Under questioning, they immediately gave up Brenda as their employer, probably hoping for reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. But Kyle delivered the most. Devastating evidence Friday morning handwriting analysis proving Brenda had forged his signature on the family court documents. "She signed my name claiming I was afraid of you," Kyle said, his voice heavy with teenage disillusionment. "I took the papers to my school counselor, who compared the signature to my enrollment forms. It's not even close. She didn't even try to match my handwriting." Forging court documents was perjury, a felony that carried serious prison time. Combined with the false police reports, attempted bribery, and property sabotage, Brenda was looking at years behind bars. That afternoon brought the financial smoking gun. Kyle discovered his mother owed $80,000 in hidden debts, including loans against the house that were due immediately. She took cash advances against our mortgage to pay legal fees and invest in Mr. Joseph's development project, Kyle explained, scrolling through financial documents on his laptop. Money's gone, and the bank is starting foreclosure proceedings next week. The kid was losing his home along with his college fund collateral damage from his mother's criminal obsession. It was heartbreaking to watch a good kid pay the price for adult corruption. But the community had rallied around Kyle with protective instincts that warmed Darius's military heart. Martha had offered him a spare bedroom. Tom. Bradley was coordinating a scholarship fund through the American Legion, and Eleanor Henderson was helping him navigate emancipation proceedings to escape his mother's legal troubles. Friday evening brought the final confrontation, Brenda's last, ditch attempt to control the narrative before everything collapsed completely. She'd called a press conference on her front lawn, probably hoping to spin herself as the victim of veteran harassment. Local reporter Janet Walsh arrived with a camera crew, expecting a simple HOA dispute story. Instead, she found federal investigators serving Brenda with a criminal indictment, state real estate commission representatives revoking her license, and a crowd of displaced families gathering for the community board removal vote. "Mrs. Whitmore," Walsh called out, "care to comment on the federal housing discrimination charges filed against you this afternoon?" Brenda's face went through several interesting color changes as she realized her press conference had become a perp walk. This is all lies, a conspiracy by unstable veterans and ungrateful neighbors who don't understand community standards. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut provided a satisfying punctuation mark to her statement. Federal marshals had arrived with arrest warrants for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations. Kyle watched from Darius's dock as his mother was loaded into a federal transport vehicle, her designer lake clothes looking ridiculous against the harsh reality of criminal consequences. "Is it wrong that I feel relieved?" Kyle asked quietly. "Son, feeling relieved when a nightmare ends isn't wrong. It's human." Tomorrow would bring the community vote, media attention, and the beginning of justice for all the families Brenda had destroyed. Tonight, Clearwater Lake was finally peaceful. Again. Friday evening transformed the Riverside Estates Community Center into something between a town hall meeting and a three-ring circus. Word had spread through social media, church networks, and veteran organizations. Over 200 people packed into a space designed for 50 with overflow crowds gathering in the parking lot around portable speakers. Local Channel 7 had set up cameras after Janet Walsh's earlier scoop about federal arrests. State legislators had sent representatives after the housing discrimination story hit regional news. The parking lot looked like a small-town festival complete with food trucks and vendors selling justice for veterans t-shirts. Brenda arrived in handcuffs, flanked by federal marshals. Her bond hearing wasn't until Monday, but she'd insisted on attending the meeting that would destroy her remaining power. Her designer clothes were wrinkled from jail, her perfect hair showing gray roots, and her eyes held the wild desperation of someone watching their world collapse. In real time, Darius entered wearing full-dress uniform, ribbons, and medals catching the community center's fluorescent lights. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes with veterans snapping to attention and civilians applauding until their hands hurt. Kyle sat in the front row next to Martha, having chosen his side decisively. His mother's eyes found him across the room, pleading silently for family loyalty. The kid looked back with teenage determination that brooked no negotiation. Federal prosecutor Amanda Joseph, no relation to the corrupt developer, stood to address the crowd first. Ladies and gentlemen, today we filed criminal charges against Brenda Whitmore and her associates for conspiracy to violate federal housing laws, systematic discrimination against protected classes, wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering. The crowd's rumble of satisfaction sounded like distant thunder. Evidence shows a pattern of targeting military families, elderly residents, and minorities across 3 states, forcing below-market property sales through harassment, intimidation, and fraudulent legal proceedings. Total damages exceed $4.2 million, says District Attorney Michael Rodriguez took the microphone next, his voice carrying prosecutorial authority. State charges include attempted bribery of public officials, filing, false police reports, perjury, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Mrs. Whitmore faces a maximum sentence of 25 years in state prison, assuming federal authorities don't claim jurisdiction first. Brenda's new attorney, the third one this week, whispered frantically in her ear, probably explaining that her legal situation had moved from difficult to catastrophic. Then came the community testimony that turned the meeting into an emotional reckoning. Eleanor Henderson spoke first, her voice steady despite years of suppressed pain. Brenda Whitmore destroyed my family. We lost our home, our savings, our children's stability. My husband had to work 3 jobs to pay the legal bills from fighting her harassment. Tonight, I'm getting my life back. Tom Bradley represented the American Legion with military precision. Ma'am targeted veterans specifically believing our PTSD made us vulnerable. She was wrong. Military families don't surrender to bullies. We organize against them. 3. Other displaced families told similar stories. Elderly couples forced into substandard housing. Young families bankrupted by legal fees. Military veterans harassed for their service. Each testimony added another nail to Brenda's legal coffin. Martha delivered the knockout punch with Polish grandmother fury. This woman is a cancer on our community. She poisoned neighbors against each other, destroyed families for money, and corrupted everything decent about lakefront living. Enough is enough. Kyle stood up slowly, his teenage voice carrying across the silent room. My mother taught me to be honest, work hard, and treat people fairly. Then, she became someone who violated every lesson she ever gave me. His voice cracked with emotion. I love my mom, but I can't support what she's done to innocent families. The kid's courage broke something in Brenda. She started crying, not tears of remorse, but rage and self-pity at being betrayed by ungrateful people she'd tried to help. Officer Johnson provided the evening's most satisfying moment when he formally apologized to Major General Mitchell before the entire crowd. "Sir," Mrs. Whitmore filed, "47 false police reports about you and other residents. On behalf of the Sheriff's Department, I apologize for not recognizing the pattern sooner. The board removal vote was anticlimactic. Votes for removal, 8 against, with 3 abstentions. Brenda's reign of suburban terror ended with the sound of paper ballots hitting a cardboard box. New board elections took 15 minutes. Martha was elected president unanimously. Tom Bradley became enforcement coordinator, and Eleanor Henderson took treasurer duties with a mandate to audit every financial transaction from the past 3 years. As federal marshals prepared to transport Brenda back to detention, she managed one final outburst. "You people don't understand," was trying to improve property values, maintain community standards. "Everything I did was legal under HOA authority." Prosecutor Joseph's response became the evening's mic drop moment delivered with courtroom precision. "Ma'am, systematic housing discrimination isn't a property management strategy. It's a federal crime. Your community standards violated the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, and basic human decency." The community center erupted in applause as Brenda was led away. Her suburban dictatorship finally ended by the very neighbors she'd tried to destroy. Outside, the late evening air carried the sound of victory laughter, conversation, and the gentle lapping of lake water against peaceful shores. Months later, Clearwater Lake had transformed from a battlefield into paradise. The morning air carried the scent of Martha's apple pie cooling on her windowsill, mixed with pine needles and the earthy smell of autumn leaves crunching underfoot. Darius sat on his rebuilt dock, coffee steaming in the crisp air, watching Kyle practice fly casting with the focused determination of a future West Point cadet. The kid had come so far from that scared teenager caught between family loyalty and moral conscience. His mother's guilty plea, 8 years federal prison, plus $4.22 million restitution, had freed him to become the young man he was always meant to be. "Mr. Mitchell got my West Point acceptance letter yesterday." Kyle's voice carried pure joy as his fly landed perfectly near the lily pads. "Interviews next month, but Colonel Martinez says I'm a lock. Your courage during the investigation earned that, son. No academy can teach what you already have, the backbone to do what's right when everything's on the line." The community transformation had been extraordinary. Eleanor Henderson's family was back in a beautiful lakefront cabin purchased with restitution money. Her kids finally stable after years of chaos. Tom Bradley's weekly Veterans Breakfast drew military families from 4 counties, turning the community center into a hub of friendship and mutual support. Martha's new HOA leadership had scrapped every harassment-enabling rule, replacing them with common-sense guidelines focused on genuine community building rather than petty power trips. The mediation program she'd established had prevented 3 potential conflicts just this month, neighbors talking through problems instead of weaponizing bureaucracy. But the crown jewel was the Clearwater Veterans Scholarship Fund, built from Brenda's forfeited criminal proceeds. The annual fundraiser featuring Grandpa Joe's legendary fish fry recipe had raised $85,000 for military families' educational expenses, with Kyle as the first recipient. Last month's ceremony had drawn national media attention when Darius delivered a speech that went viral across military social media. "My grandfather bought this land in 1944 to build something permanent, not just property, but community where people protected each other. That dream survived Hitler's war, the Cold War, and multiple recessions. It wasn't going to die to some suburban bully with a fancy business card. The 5-minute standing ovation had been audible across the entire lake, with veterans from 6 states driving in to show solidarity. Now Kyle was preparing for his own service, carrying forward lessons learned during their suburban war. The kid understood something most adults never figured out. Real strength came from standing up for others, not pushing them down. Darius's phone buzzed with a message from DOJ Clearwater case, becoming national training model for housing discrimination prosecution, consulting opportunities available. Maybe it was time to take this fight nationwide. Martha had mentioned similar harassment campaigns in lakefront communities across 3 states, veterans being targeted by people who mistook military honor for weakness. Big mistake that needed systematic correction. Kyle, what do you think about helping other communities fight back a traveling justice operation? The kid's grin could have powered the whole lake, like Batman, but for HOA bullies. When do we start? That evening, the weekly community barbecue filled the air with laughter and the sizzle of burgers on Martha's ancient grill. 3 generations mingled easily: elderly original residents, young military families, and everything in between. This was what Brenda's harassment had tried to destroy. Genuine community built on mutual respect rather than fear. As purple sunset painted the water, Kyle approached with teenage seriousness. Mr. Mitchell, I want to major in military law at the academy. Figure I can do more good with a law degree in military training. Perfect. The kid had found his calling through adversity, transformed from victim to advocate by watching adults do the right thing under pressure. Later, Darius visited Sarah's grave with updates she would have loved. The headstone was surrounded by community-planted flowers, neighbors who'd never met her, but understood love's enduring power through shared struggle. Mission accomplished, sweetheart. The lake's peaceful, the kids headed for West Point, and bullies learned not to mess with military families. Your advice about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Best guidance you ever gave me. The loons called across darkening water, same sound his grandfather had loved, now echoing over a community reborn through courage, justice, and neighbors willing to fight for each other. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments. Let's help each other fight back against suburban tyrants who think they can abuse military families and elderly neighbors. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales about ordinary people beating corrupt systems through community organizing, legal knowledge, and good old-fashioned American justice. Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Chirons and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.